everyone, and welcome to our comprehensive lecture series on the Indian economy. Today, we are diving into a critical topic, unemployment and labor reforms in India. We'll be exploring what unemployment really means, how it's measured, and the various forms it takes in a developing economy. Here is a quick look at our roadmap for this chapter. In this first session, we will cover the foundational concepts, the definition of unemployment, how we measure it using various methods, the newly introduced jobs gap indicator, the different types of unemployment, and the current size of the workforce in India. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is unemployment? In economics, it is not just about being without a job. An unemployed person is specifically someone who is able to work, willing to work, falls within the working age of 15 to 60 years, and is physically and mentally fit, but still cannot find a job at the prevailing wage rate. Notice that if someone simply doesn't want to work, they aren't technically classified as unemployed. Why is unemployment such a persistent issue in India? There are several structural reasons. We face slow economic development relative to our population explosion. Our education system often doesn't align with industry needs, leading to a massive mismatch between the skills graduates have and the skills employers want. Additionally, we have the issue of underemployment, where people are working but in jobs far below their actual skill or education level. To understand unemployment statistics, we must distinguish between three key terms. Labor supply is measured in man days and changes based on wage rates. If wages go up, people might offer to work more hours. Labor force, however, is a headcount of everyone who is either working or actively looking for work, regardless of wages. Finally, the workforce is strictly the headcount of people who are currently employed. From those definitions, we derive several crucial formulas. The number of unemployed is simply the labor force minus the workforce. The unemployment rate is the percentage of the labor force that is jobless. We also measure the labor force participation rate, or LFPR, which tells us what fraction of the working age population is actually engaging with the job market. Another interesting metric is employment intensity, which measures how many jobs are created per lakh of real GDP. How does India actually measure these numbers? Based on the recommendations of the Prof. M.L. Dantwala Committee in 1960, the National Sample Survey Office uses three primary methods: usual principal status, current weekly status, and current daily status. And just as a technical note, a standard man day is considered 8 hours of work, and individuals engaged in illegal or non-economic activities like gambling or begging are excluded from these metrics. Before we break down the measurement methods, let's look at a fascinating behavioral concept, the unemployment trap. This happens when the opportunity cost of going to work is actually higher than the income you'd receive. For instance, a fresh engineering graduate might choose to remain unemployed rather than take a minimum wage job because taking that job leaves them no time to study for better opportunities. Now, let's look at the first measurement method, usual principal status, or UPS. Here, the reference period is an entire year. It measures chronic, long-term unemployment. Because very few people in India can afford to survive without any work for a full year, this method usually gives the lowest unemployment rate. A broader version is UPSS, which considers you employed if you worked for at least 30 days out of the past 365. The second method is the current weekly status. As the name suggests, the reference period shrinks to just 1 week preceding the survey. Under CWS, if a person works for even a single hour on any one day during that week, they are classified as employed. Because the time frame is shorter, this method captures more temporary joblessness, resulting in a higher unemployment rate than the UPS method. The most granular method is the current daily status, where the reference period is just a single day. If you work 4 hours or more, you are fully employed for the day. Between 1 and 4 hours counts as a half day, and less than an hour means you are unemployed. CDS is the most inclusive measure. It captures seasonal fluctuations and underemployment perfectly, which is why it always yields the highest estimate of unemployment among the three methods. Moving beyond traditional metrics, the International Labor Organization recently introduced a new indicator called the jobs gap. Traditional unemployment doesn't tell the whole story. The jobs gap measures broader labor underutilization. It includes people who want a job, even if they aren't actively searching or aren't available at a moment's notice. This is a crucial metric for understanding hidden joblessness. The ILO recognizes 3 degrees of labor underutilization. First are the strictly unemployed. They are searching and available immediately. Second is the potential labor force, people who fail just one criteria. Maybe they are searching but can't start this week. Third are willing non-job seekers. They want a job but aren't searching and aren't available immediately. The probability of finding a job drops significantly as you move from the first to the third category.
Why does the jobs gap matter? Economically, it behaves much like unemployment. It rises during recessions and falls during booms. Interestingly, the famous Phillips curve, which shows a trade-off between inflation and unemployment, also applies to the jobs gap. This metric is especially vital in developing nations and for women, who often can't accept a job on a one-week notice due to domestic responsibilities or the informal nature of the economy.
Now let's categorize unemployment. At the highest level, it is either voluntary or involuntary. Voluntary unemployment is when jobs are available, but a person simply chooses not to work. These individuals are completely excluded from the labor force calculations. Involuntary unemployment is the real economic problem. This is when people are willing and able to work, but the economy simply doesn't have jobs for them.
Within involuntary unemployment, the first major type is structural unemployment. This is deeply tied to a country's economic framework. In India, our population grows rapidly, but capital formation, the building of factories and businesses, is slow. This means the supply of labor vastly outpaces demand. It's also caused by skill mismatches, making this a very stubborn, long-term problem. Next is disguised unemployment, a massive issue in India. This happens when more people are working on a job than are actually needed. In economic terms, their marginal productivity is zero. If you remove them from the field, total crop output won't drop at all. We see this heavily in agriculture due to joint family systems, but critics note it's also prevalent in overstaffed public sector enterprises. Then we have frictional and cyclical unemployment. Frictional unemployment is the temporary gap when workers are transitioning between jobs or out of work due to strikes and lockouts, very common in the industrial sector. Cyclical unemployment, on the other hand, is tied to the boom and bust trade cycles of the broader economy. When a recession hits, demand drops and people lose jobs. This is actually more common in developed nations. Moving on, chronic unemployment is exactly what it sounds like, a long-term, persistent lack of jobs driven by a vicious cycle of poverty and underutilized resources. Alongside this, we face technological unemployment. As industries modernize and introduce automation, computers, and labor-saving machinery, human workers are inevitably replaced by machines. Finally, we have casual, seasonal, and vulnerable unemployment. Casual workers, like daily wage laborers in construction, lose work the moment a short-term contract ends. Seasonal workers, like farmers, only have income during harvest or sowing seasons. Vulnerable unemployment refers to self-employed individuals and unpaid family workers who lack any formal contracts, job security, or decent working conditions.
Let's look at the actual numbers. According to the 6th Annual Employment-Unemployment Survey for 2016-17, using the usual principal status method, India's total unemployment rate was 5.4%. Notice the divide. Urban unemployment at 6.1% was higher than rural at 5.2%. But the most striking gap is gender. Male unemployment was 4.2%, while female unemployment was more than double at 9.2%.
Diving deeper into that survey data, we see that our labor force participation rate is only about 51.2%. A staggering 75% of our workforce is male, and 70% of all workers are in rural areas. Interestingly, while rural areas have more total unemployed people, urban females face the highest rates of unemployment. Understanding these demographics is crucial for policymaking. Next, we will look at the important organizations responsible for tracking these statistics and the labor reforms designed to fix these gaps. Moving right into the institutional framework, let us examine the key organizations operating under the Ministry of Labor and Unemployment. First, we have the Dattopant Thingadi National Board for Workers' Education and Development, or DTNBWED, headquartered in New Delhi. Established back in 1958, this autonomous body focuses on educating the workforce. Its goal is to foster an enlightened, disciplined workforce and drive positive behavioral changes across organized, unorganized, and rural sectors. Next is DGFASLI, the Directorate General Factory Advice Service and Labor Institutes in Mumbai.
Set up even earlier in 1945, it plays a critical advisory role, guiding both central and state governments on how to administer the Factories Act and coordinate factory inspection services effectively.
Continuing with our list, we look at the Directorate General of Mines Safety, abbreviated as DGMS, located in Dhanbad. This is a vital regulatory agency. Mining is inherently hazardous, so the DGMS is strictly responsible for the occupational safety, health, and overall welfare of people working in coal, metalliferous, and oil mines. Then we have the Indian Labour Archives, or ILA, situated in Noida. Established in 1998, its mission is historical and academic. It focuses on preserving and providing access to fast-depleting documents and records related to the working class, ensuring that the history of labor in India is not lost to time.
Next is the Labor Bureau, headquartered in Chandigarh. This organization is the backbone of labor statistics in India. It collects, collates, and publishes data on everything from wages and productivity to absenteeism and industrial relations. It is essentially a storehouse for major economic indicators, including the Consumer Price Index for various labor demographics. Its functions are broadly divided into labor intelligence, labor research, and monitoring the Minimum Wages Act of 1948. Finally, we have the V.V. Giri National Labor Institute in Noida. Set up in 1974, this autonomous body is the premier hub for research, training, education, and consultancy regarding labor issues in the country.
Now let us shift our focus to the various reports and surveys that provide us with labor statistics and unemployment data. The most prominent today is the Periodic Labor Force Survey, or PLFS. Published by the National Statistical Office under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, it was introduced in 2017. It is conducted annually to estimate key employment indicators. Before the PLFS, we relied on the Employment-Unemployment Survey, or EUS. The EUS was published by the Labor Bureau but was discontinued in 2017. It used to be the Comprehensive Household Survey for labor force statistics before the PLFS took over to provide more frequent and updated data.
Another important tool is the Quarterly Employment Survey, or QES, published by the Labor Bureau. As the name suggests, this provides quarterly data, specifically focusing on 9 selected non-farm sectors to give a rapid assessment of employment trends. Then we have the Annual Survey of Unincorporated Sector Enterprises, known as ASUS. This is published by the NSSO. Why is ASUS important? Because it measures the economic and operational characteristics of unincorporated, non-agricultural businesses across manufacturing, trade, and services, excluding construction. This helps capture data from the vast informal sector that often goes undocumented.
Moving on to payroll reporting, published by the NSO. This measures formal sector employment by tracking new subscribers to Social Security schemes like the Employees Provident Fund, state insurance, and national pension scheme. A very positive trend here is that yearly net payroll additions to the EPFO more than doubled from 61.1 lakh in FY19 to 131.5 lakh in FY24, indicating strong job creation and formalization. We also have the Occupational Wage Survey by the Labor Bureau. This survey collects specific occupation-wise data on wages and dearness allowances across services, plantations, mines, and manufacturing. This data is crucial because it helps build the base year weights needed to update our wage rate index.
Speaking of the Wage Rate Index, it is also published by the Labor Bureau. It tracks the relative changes in wage rates over time and is currently compiled for 37 select industries using 2016 as the base year. The Labor Bureau also conducts several other socioeconomic surveys. These include specific studies on the living conditions of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe workers in urban areas, workers in the unorganized sector, and evaluations of the Minimum Wages Act. Finally, the Bureau publishes annual reports on various industrial aspects, which meticulously track industrial disputes, absenteeism, factory closures, retrenchments, and layoffs across the country.
Let us take a deeper dive into the Periodic Labor Force Survey, or PLFS. As mentioned, it replaced the discontinued EUS in 2017 and is conducted annually by the NSO, unlike the EUS, which was handled by the Ministry of Labor. A major methodological shift occurred with the first PLFS in 2017-18. Instead of using monthly per capita expenditure to stratify the population, the PLFS uses education levels. Furthermore, it brought a massive technological upgrade. For the first time, the survey utilized the World Bank's Computer-Assisted Personal Interviewing, or CAPI platform, moving away from the traditional paper-based methods used in the EUS.
Looking specifically at the PLFS annual report for 2024-24, we must understand its two primary objectives. First, it aims to estimate key indicators like the worker population ratio, labor force participation rate, and unemployment rate over short 3-month intervals. However, this short-term tracking is done exclusively for urban areas using the current weekly status approach. The second objective is broader, to estimate these same indicators annually for both rural and urban areas, utilizing both the usual status method and the current weekly status method. This dual approach gives policymakers both a rapid urban snapshot and a comprehensive annual national picture. So what did the 2023-24 PLFS reveal regarding the usual status? The findings show substantial improvement across the board. The labor force participation rate for those aged 15 and above saw a massive jump in rural areas, from 50.7% in 2017-18 to 63.7%. Urban areas also grew to 52%. Notably, female participation nearly doubled, reaching 41.7%. The worker population ratio mirrored this success, with rural WPR climbing to 62.1% and female WPR rising to 40.3%. Consequently, the unemployment rate dropped significantly. Rural unemployment fell to just 2.5%, and both male and female unemployment rates equalized at a low 3.2% nationally.
This table lays out the precise usual status data trends over the last 3 survey years for individuals aged 15 and above. If you look at the total rural plus urban columns, you can clearly trace the positive trajectory. The overall labor force participation rate steadily climbed from 55.2% in 2021-22 to 60.1% in 2023-24. Similarly, the overall worker population ratio increased from 52.9% to 58.2%. Most importantly, the combined unemployment rate, which was at 4.1% in 2021-22, has stabilized at a much lower 3.2% for the last 2 survey cycles, indicating a resilient recovery in the labor market. Now let us examine the findings under the Current Weekly Status, or CWS, which captures short-term labor market fluctuations. The trends here are equally encouraging. Rural LFPR increased by 10 percentage points since 2017-18, reaching 58.9%. Female participation under CWS also saw a healthy rise to 35.6%. The worker population ratio in rural areas jumped to 56.5%. As a result of more people finding work, the unemployment rate under CWS halved in rural areas, dropping from 8.4% to 4.2%. Urban unemployment also saw a notable decline, falling to 6.7%, with male and female rates dropping to 4.8% and 5.0% respectively. Here's the year-by-year breakdown for the current weekly status over the last 3 years. The combined national LFPR grew consistently from 51.7% in 2021-22 to 56.4% in 2023-24. The worker population ratio followed suit, rising from 48.3% to 53.7%. Notice the unemployment rate column on the far right. The overall national unemployment rate under CWS was 6.6% in 2021-22. It dropped to 5.1% the following year, and further decreased to 4.9% in 2023-24. This confirms that even on a short-term, weekly measurement basis, job availability has been steadily improving. Beyond the PLFS, we have the Quarterly Employment Survey, which focuses on firms with 10 or more workers across 9 major sectors. These sectors represent 83% of total formal employment. In the last quarter of 2022-23, employment in these sectors hit 3.2 crore, driven by rebounds in IT, health, and education. Manufacturing held the largest share of workers. Interestingly, 86.4% were regular employees, showing high formalization in this segment, while females made up 31.8% of this workforce. On the other hand, we also look at private estimates, like those from the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, or CMEI. Their data estimated a higher overall unemployment rate of around 9.2% in June 2024. Taking a global perspective, the International Labor Organization released its World Employment and Social Outlook report for 2025. It notes that while the global economy is expanding moderately, it might lose momentum, which could hinder a robust labor market recovery. However, there is good news. The global unemployment rate dropped slightly to 5% in 2024, down from 5.1% in 2023. The report also highlights a stark contrast between economies. In high-income countries, the unemployment rate is 4.5%, with a jobs gap rate of 7.1% for men. But in low-income countries, unemployment is higher at 5.7%, and the jobs gap rate for men is more than double at 15.2%.
Let us break down the occupational structure in India as of 2020-21. When we look at the overall picture, the primary sector, which is mostly agriculture, still employs the largest chunk of the workforce at 46.5%. The tertiary or services sector follows at 29.6%, and the secondary or manufacturing sector is at 23.9%. However, there is a massive rural-urban divide. In rural areas, a dominant 60.8% of workers are in the primary sector. Conversely, in urban areas, the primary sector is practically non-existent at 6.5%, while the tertiary sector dominates, employing 60.5% of the urban workforce.
To understand how our economy has evolved, we must look at the change in occupational structure since independence. In 1950-51, a staggering 72.7% of India's workforce was engaged in the primary sector. Fast forward to 2024-25, and that number has dropped significantly to 45%. Where did those workers go? They moved to the secondary and tertiary sectors. The secondary sector's share of the workforce grew from just 10% to 25%, while the tertiary sector expanded from 17.3% to 30%. This structural shift reflects India's transition from a purely agrarian economy toward industrialization and services. Another fascinating dataset is the Time Use Survey of 2024, conducted by the NSO. This is only the second such survey in India, the first being in 2019. Its goal is to measure exactly how men and women spend their time across paid and unpaid activities. The 2024 findings reveal that both men and women are spending more average time on employment-related activities compared to 2019. However, a glaring inequality remains at home. Women spend 20% of their day on unpaid domestic and care work, whereas men spend a mere 3%. Additionally, the survey noted a general societal shift. People in both rural and urban areas are spending more time on leisure and media and less on socializing and self-care.
Now, we must address a critical challenge in the Indian economy: jobless growth. This occurs when the GDP increases, but employment levels do not rise perceptibly alongside it. Essentially, economic growth outpaces job creation, leading to chronic unemployment. Why does this happen? Primarily, it is due to the adoption of highly efficient, labor-saving technology. Furthermore, post-1991, India's growth has been driven by the service sector. While services account for 54% of our GDP, they only employ 30% of the workforce because they are not highly labor-intensive. Add to this the stagnation in manufacturing, a lack of high-level skills for modern IT jobs, disguised unemployment in agriculture, and financial stress like non-performing assets in job-creating sectors like MSMEs.
To quantify jobless growth, economists use a metric called employment elasticity, which is the ratio of employment growth to economic growth. The data here is alarming. Between 1972 and 1983, elasticity was 0.52%. By the 2004 to 2012 period, it had plummeted to just 0.04%, which is practically zero. In agriculture, it even turned negative. A major driver of this trend is our reliance on foreign direct investment. Because India lacks sufficient domestic capital, we rely on FDI, which typically brings in advanced labor-saving Western technology. This means foreign capital makes our production highly efficient and boosts GDP, but it requires far fewer workers, making the correction of jobless growth a monumental challenge for policymakers.
In labor economics, the relationship between job availability and unemployment is visualized using the Beveridge curve, also known as the UV curve. As you can see on the graph, the unemployment rate is on the x-axis and the vacancy rate is on the y-axis. The curve itself is hyperbolic and slopes downward. This downward slope illustrates a simple inverse relationship. When unemployment is high, job vacancies are typically low, and vice versa. If an economy is at a point on the lower right of this curve, meaning high unemployment and very few vacancies, it is a strong indicator that the economy is going through a recessionary period.
To understand the changing nature of jobs, we need to look at how the NSO classifies the workforce. There are three main categories. First, the self-employed, which includes employers, freelancers, and unpaid family labor who do not work for a wage. The rest are hired workers, split into casual and regular. Casual workers are hired on daily wages. They get basic rights like regular hours and provident fund, but miss out on major social security benefits like pensions. Regular workers, however, are on a permanent payroll with full benefits. We also classify by enterprise size. Formal workers are in the organized sector, meaning government or private firms with 10 or more employees,
while informal workers are in enterprises with fewer than 10 workers. A concerning trend in India is the casualization of the workforce, where a growing share of workers are taking up casual, daily wage jobs rather than regular employment. Why is this happening? A major reason is migration. Rural workers, escaping disguised unemployment in agriculture, move to cities, but lacking formal skills, they are forced into casual labor. Additionally, the boom in urban real estate and rural schemes like MGNREGA have created massive demand in the construction sector, which relies heavily on daily rated workers. To reverse this trend, the government must focus heavily on educational reforms and skill development, while also promoting self-employment by making credit and infrastructure easily accessible to aspiring entrepreneurs. Closely linked to casualization is the rapid informalization of the Indian workforce. Today, a staggering 90% of Indian workers are in the informal sector, leaving only 10% with formal job security. This shift accelerated after the 1991 LPG reforms, as the transition to a competitive market economy pushed companies to cut costs. Other factors include a severe lack of entry-level vocational skills and highly complex labor laws. Because compliance is so difficult, many private firms avoid hiring regular employees, opting for contractual workers instead. This massive informalization leaves the vast majority of our workforce highly vulnerable to market shocks, making it imperative to implement strategies that support the MSME sector and simplify labor regulations. When discussing rural unemployment, we must highlight the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, or MGNREGA, launched in 2006. It legally guarantees 100 days of wage employment annually to any rural household willing to do unskilled manual work. The government even boosted its funding by 40,000 crore rupees during the COVID-19 pandemic to provide immediate relief. Its achievements are undeniable. It has massively increased rural employment and driven social inclusion by ensuring high participation from women and marginalized communities. Furthermore, by mandating wage payments through banks and post offices, it has spurred financial inclusion, all while creating durable rural assets like check dams and concrete roads.
However, MGNREGA is not without its flaws. Workers frequently suffer from delayed wage payments, which defeats the purpose of a safety net. There is also a concerning trend of a declining wage component in the budgets of some panchayats, and a widespread reluctance by authorities to pay the mandated unemployment allowance when work cannot be provided. Despite these administrative hurdles, the UNDP has recognized MGNREGA as a global milestone for poverty alleviation. It has empowered rural populations and revitalized local governance. Therefore, while its continuation is absolutely vital for rural development, fixing these implementation inefficiencies is critical. This brings us to the end of our analysis of labor statistics and structural challenges, setting the stage perfectly for our next discussion on recent government initiatives to reduce unemployment.
Let us examine the recent government initiatives aimed at reducing unemployment and minimizing the socio-economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Atma-Nirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana, part of the 3.0 package, was specifically designed to create new opportunities and push for the formalization of informal jobs. Alongside job creation, safety nets are crucial. The Employees Deposit-Linked Insurance Scheme ensures that if an employee tragically passes away while employed, their family receives vital financial assistance. Moving beyond general employment, specific demographics require tailored support. The Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment developed the SMILE scheme, which stands for Support for Marginalized Individuals for Livelihood and Enterprise. This program focuses heavily on the comprehensive rehabilitation of beggars. Additionally, the PM Daksh portal and mobile app were launched to ensure that targeted, vulnerable groups have direct digital access to various skill development schemes. Skilling the youth is a massive priority. Through the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana 4.0, the government offers over 300 distinct skill courses to make young people job-ready. But what if they want to start their own business? That is where the Prime Minister's Employment Generation Program comes in. Managed by the Ministry of Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises, it provides credit-linked subsidies to help unemployed youth and traditional artisans set up micro-enterprises in the non-farm sector. To keep pace with global technological shifts, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology launched Future Skills Prime, focusing on upskilling IT workers in 10 emerging fields, including artificial intelligence. For rural empowerment, the Deen Dayal Upadhyaya Gramin Kaushal Yojana targets specific groups like SC, ST, minorities, and women. Finally, the STRIVE scheme, backed by the World Bank, works to upgrade the quality and efficiency of training provided in industrial training institutes and apprenticeship programs.
Labor is just as essential as capital for any industry. In India, labor falls under the concurrent list of the Seventh Schedule, meaning both union and state governments can frame laws around it. For industries to reach their true potential, labor reforms are necessary. These reforms aim to strike a delicate balance, increasing production and employment opportunities while fiercely protecting workers' interests. This includes updating skills, ensuring job security, and safeguarding trade union rights.
Following the recommendations of the Second National Commission on Labor, the government consolidated numerous complex laws into 4 streamlined labor codes. The first is the Code on Wages, 2019, which subsumed 4 previous laws. It introduces a crucial concept. The central government sets a floor wage based on regional living standards. State governments must then set their minimum wages above this floor, factoring in the specific skill level and nature of the work.
Next are the codes on industrial relations and Social Security. The Industrial Relations Code of 2020 clarifies the definition of a worker and sets strict rules for factory closures, layoffs, and prior intimation for strikes. The Social Security Code of 2020 is particularly modern. It recognizes the changing economy by establishing a dedicated Social Security fund for unorganized gig and platform workers, funded jointly by the government and the aggregators who employ them.
The fourth pillar is the Code on Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions, which replaced 13 older laws. This code is vital for daily worker welfare. It strictly limits working hours to 8 hours a day and expands legal protections to cover contract workers. Importantly, it mandates equal safety provisions for women and explicitly guarantees the rights and protections of interstate migrant workers, a highly vulnerable segment of the workforce. In 2018, a significant shift occurred regarding fixed-term employment. Previously limited to specific sectors, it was open to all industries. Under this rule, a worker is hired for a specific duration via a written contract. While they receive the exact same wages, hours, and benefits as permanent employees, their contract simply expires without the need for a termination notice. This promotes the ease of doing business, but critics point out it makes laying off workers much easier for companies. To secure the future of the most vulnerable, the Ministry of Labor and Employment launched 2 pension schemes in 2019. The first is the Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Man Dhan. This is a voluntary, contributory pension scheme designed specifically for unorganized sector workers earning 15,000 rupees or less per month. If a worker between 18 and 40 joins, the central government matches their monthly contribution, guaranteeing a minimum monthly pension of 3,000 rupees after they turn 60. The second scheme targets the small business sector, the National Pension Scheme for traders, shopkeepers, and self-employed persons. It operates similarly to the PMSYM, but is tailored for individuals whose annual turnover does not exceed 1.5 crore rupees. Provided they are not already covered by other schemes like EPFO or paying income tax, they can contribute to this fund. The government matches their contribution 50-50, again ensuring a 3,000 rupee monthly pension upon reaching age 60.
For the formal, salaried sector, the Employees Provident Fund, or EPF, is the primary social security net. Any organization with 20 or more employees must offer this. It is mandatory for workers earning up to 15,000 rupees a month. The math works like this. The employee contributes 12% of their basic salary. The employer matches that 12%, but it is split. 3.67% goes to the Provident Fund, while the remaining 8.33% funds the employee's pension scheme.
2 other vital safety nets are the ESI and the Atal Pension Yojana. The Employee State Insurance Scheme protects organized sector workers earning up to 21,000 rupees a month, covering medical contingencies like sickness, maternity, and workplace injuries. On the other hand, the Atal Pension Yojana is open to any Indian citizen between 18 and 40, primarily focusing on unorganized workers, offering a guaranteed future pension ranging from 1,000 to 5,000 rupees depending on their contribution.
Looking toward the future, we must address the massive paradigm shift brought by artificial intelligence. The complexity of AI models means that intelligent machines will soon handle tasks we currently consider strictly human domains. The challenge is that AI research is vastly outpacing the regulatory and ethical frameworks needed to manage it. Soon, AI is expected to outperform humans even in critical decision-making areas like healthcare, finance, and criminal justice.
The macroeconomic threat to India is severe. The International Labor Organization estimates 75 million jobs globally are at risk. For a labor surplus country like India, which needs to create over 78 lakh non-farm jobs annually by 2030, prolonged displacement is dangerous. Because India relies heavily on low-value added IT services, these jobs are highly susceptible to automation as firms cut costs. Furthermore, if workers lose jobs, domestic consumption falls, threatening the entire consumption-based economy.
Let us review some foundational economic definitions. Unemployment strictly refers to someone aged 15 to 60 who is able and willing to work but cannot find a job at the current wage rate. Disguised unemployment occurs when people appear to be working, perhaps on a family farm, but their actual contribution to production is zero. Their marginal productivity is nil. To track formal jobs, the Labor Bureau conducts the Quarterly Employment Survey, covering firms with 10 or more workers across 9 major sectors. Another essential concept is the Beveridge curve. This is a graphical representation that plots the unemployment rate on the x-axis against the job vacancy rate on the y-axis. The resulting curve is hyperbolic and slopes downward. It simply illustrates an inverse relationship. When the economy is doing well, job vacancies are high and unemployment is low. And conversely, during a recession, vacancies drop while unemployment rises.
To wrap up our discussion, we have seen that the government is actively pushing job creation and skilling through targeted schemes like ABRY and PMKVY. The consolidation of complex laws into 4 new labor codes aims to balance industrial productivity with essential worker rights. Meanwhile, expanded Social Security and pension schemes are providing much-needed safety nets. However, as we look ahead, the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence will require strong institutional responses to protect India's labor surplus economy.